I call to order the September 25th regular business meeting of Waynesboro City Council. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. For those in attendance, if you wish to speak during one of the public hearings or citizen comment period, please sign up on the appropriate sheets in the back of chambers. Mr. Short, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Pleasure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Item 3 is the adoption of the meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. And is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the agenda is approved, 5-0. Item 4 is matters from mayor. Last week, Councilman Lee, Vice Mayor Wood, and myself had the pleasure of hosting the Winona Elementary third grade class here in our council chambers as part of their studies on the role of local government. Vice Mayor Wood did a fantastic job keeping the children engaged, and I'd also like to thank Ms. Bortle for all your assistance in facilitating a successful visit. After their trip, before they left to go back to school, there were several that expressed interest in running for future office, so our future looks bright. Item 5 is matters from council members. Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, well, I'm going to add on to what you said about our experience with the Winona third graders. Mayor Lilly and Mayor Max did a great job. We had two different groups of them in here, and just a little brief of what they did so you all know exactly what happened, which I thought was great. They were voting on, or they were discussing and voting on spending $5 million to add a pet-friendly splash park to our pool. We explained where the money comes from, where it comes from the citizens and the taxpayers. At first, they were all about me buying them a splash park, and then they found out where the money actually really comes from. That changed the story. The first time, it passed 3-2. The second group of third graders, it was actually voted down 4-1. Both times, after everything was done, I asked the rest of the class that represented the citizens how many wanted it, and told them to put their hands down. Then I asked how many were against it. And both times, the first class, it was a 3-2 ratio of the class who said they wanted it. Mm-hmm. And in the second class, it was a 4-1 ratio that said they didn't want it. So that was a good explanation and a good example of how when a good city council will represent the people that elect them. So it turned out fabulous. The kids were great. Mm-hmm. I got a whole packet full of thank yous and stuff, all handwritten. That's just will go on my refrigerator at home. So it was a great, just a great event, and probably my favorite so far that we've done since I've been on city council. So yeah, if y'all get a chance and we do it again, we'll post it. I hope so you can come and see and watch. It was great.
All right. Anybody else? No? Okay. Item 6 is the consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? And the agenda is passed. Consent agenda is passed 5-0. Item 7 is to acknowledge Ms. Kristen Crummett-Dollar, co-founder and director of Magnolia Rose, a nonprofit organization in Waynesboro, on receipt of the Stanton Masonic Lodge No. 13's Community Builders Award. I would like to invite Ms. Crummett-Dollar and representatives of the lodge forward at this time for any remarks.
Well, good evening. My name is Steve Young. I'm representing the Grand Lodge of Virginia this evening. I want to first of all thank you, City Council and Mayor, for including us in the agenda this evening. It was important for us to recognize Kristen in front of all the citizens of Waynesboro, not just in front of our lodge or in front of her organizations. So we appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that. I'm going to turn it over to David Hayes. He's the master of Stanton Lodge number 13, and it's actually the lodge, the local lodge, that does the presentation.
Council members, guests, and everybody else involved. We couldn't do it without this lady and the support and everything else. When she came to our lodge to present the program and so forth, and I found out money is hard to come by, as we just heard about that other project that we was talking about, I was compelled, and our lodge is definitely behind Magnolia Rose and a couple others, especially the ones that don't get money from other sources and so forth, and I'm most honored to be here, and thank y'all for letting us come here and take up your time to do this. This award says the most worshipful Grand Lodge of ancient, free, and accepted Masons of the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is a Community Builders Award that the Lodge presents to some outstanding citizen that does work above and beyond, so to speak, and we're delighted to be here to do that. This Community Builders Award is presented to Kristen Crummett Dollar in recognition of outstanding service to the community. This award is given and heartfelt gratitude is expressed for significant efforts towards making the community a better place in which to live. And that y'all have certainly been doing. And we thank you, and we'll continue to support you, and thank y'all for letting us be here tonight. You're more than welcome.
I do think it's important to add, I'm also a member of the Waynesboro Masonic Lodge. And when it came time to nominate someone for the Community Builders Award, it just so happened Stanton beat Waynesboro to it because our meeting is earlier in the week. Because their name was brought up for the second nomination as well. And we're like, nope, you're too late. We got them on Tuesday night. So a lot of people have got their eye on them and are seeing what they're doing for the community.
Thank you.
Now, could we trouble somebody for a photo so we can put it in the Masonic Herald?
Absolutely.
Somebody be willing to take a photo for us?
Would you like us to join you? Okay.
Yes, please.
Would you like us to stand back here or come down there? We can. Sure. There you go. Should I come down?
Yeah, I think you could, yeah, you might want to come down.
Okay.
We're not going to say anything.
What are you saying?
I'm tall, that's what it is.
Got everybody?
Okay, I took it.
Thank you so much. And congratulations on the award. Okay. Give them just a minute. There we go. Okay, item 8 is to hold a public hearing and consider adopting an ordinance granting a conditional use permit for a manufactured home in the RG5 General Residential District at 1722 3rd Street, tax map parcel 48-1-188-7, Waynesboro, Virginia. Ms. Tate?
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. This request was presented to you at your meeting on September 11th, and tonight the public hearing is scheduled for that conditional use permit request. So conditional use permits allow for a case-by-case review of uses which may be but are not always compatible with the neighboring uses. In order to approve the permit, the proposed use must be found to be consistent with good zoning practice, no more adverse to health, safety, or comfort of persons living or working in the area than those uses that are generally permitted in the district, and then no more detrimental economically or otherwise to property or improvements in the surrounding area than those uses that are generally permitted in the district. The property is located at 1722 3rd Street. And you can see that location there in red, represented by the city, and then some of the other roadways in that area with Malcolm Avenue and 3rd Street intersecting. So the nature of the request is to permit the placement of a manufactured home in the RG5, or what's referred to as our general residential district. The parcel is currently vacant, and you can see it outlined in blue with the aerial underneath. The comprehensive plan does designate the property for medium-density residential development. The zoning permits manufactured homes in the RG5 district by a conditional use permit. The requirement is that the lot size be at least 5,000 square feet, and this subject lot is 6,250 square feet. The pertinent section of the ordinance, section 98-4.2.7, requires that manufactured homes be on a full foundation or completely skirted by materials that are approved by the building official, be set up and tied down in accordance with standards in the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code, and then also notes that wheels, axles, towing apparatus, and any kind of transporting lights be removed prior to the final installation. Some additional components of the zoning ordinance does require that all single-family homes and duplexes have a primary facade and entrance that is parallel to the street from which the front setback is marked. So you will see in this particular example, narrow lots make that parallel placement to the roadway prohibitive. But the applicant was able to find a unit that had a primary facade on the narrow end, which would permit perpendicular placement of the manufactured home. And here are some examples of units that do have that facade on the narrow end of the building. This just shows the area. So it's that vacant lot in between those two existing structures where the manufactured home is requested to be placed. This just shows another view of that lot. So this block of 3rd Street does contain a mix of single-family and manufactured homes. The broader neighborhood also contains many manufactured single and double-wide homes mixed in with stick-built single-family homes. The applicant is purchasing a new unit, and its placement would complement the neighboring units in the area and not detract from the neighborhood. Manufactured homes are also an affordable alternative to a traditional stick-built single-family home. And the applicant is aware of and prepared to meet all the zoning code requirements that have been identified. The Planning Commission does recommend approval of the request with no conditions. The applicant is here, but she does not wish to speak, and then we have scheduled the public hearing for this evening.
Okay. Are there any questions before we? Okay. I hereby open the public hearing. Mr. Ham?
No one has signed up to speak.
Okay. I hereby close the public hearing. This ordinance was introduced, seconded, and discussed at the previous meeting, and unless there is additional discussion, I will call the question. All in favor of the ordinance granting the conditional use permit according upon application by Ms. Kimberly Rock Miller, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that passes 5-0. Item 9 is to receive a report and consider introducing an ordinance amending Chapter 14 Animals of the Code of the City of Waynesboro. Mr. Hamp?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Williams and members of council, due to changes in the Code of Virginia and associated administrative regulations, the staff recommends certain amendments to Chapter 14 to bring it into conformity with the state code and to achieve coordination with the ordinances of Stanton and Augusta County, given the joint operation of the animal shelter. As stated above, the amendments primarily achieve conformity with the state code. However, council is asked to codify penalties for violation of various code sections, establish fees for dog licenses and penalties for failure to obtain a license, and consider an impound fee associated with services at the animal shelter. Give me a second. I'm going to pass out a document here. The various fees are located throughout the chapter, and I thought it might be helpful to create a summary chart of what we hope to accomplish, and the staff at Litton and Sype were able to do that. So on the left side, the 5-column chart illustrates what the new ordinance proposes to occur, and I would note that these violations are converting from what is now a misdemeanor or criminal charge to a civil offense. The 2-column chart on the right, labeled current, illustrates what is currently codified and what happens if in violation of the various provisions of the code. In addition to these, I note that there's a recommendation. Presently, the dog license fee in Waynesboro is $7.50 per dog. And presently, the fee for failing to obtain a license is $10. My recommendation to council is that the license fee remains $7.50 and the penalty for failing to obtain a license be reduced to $5. In terms of impoundment, there's remains some coordination to occur among the three localities, but I think there's a good chance we'll end up with a policy or a code provision that states if the animal is redeemed at the shelter within 24 hours, there would be a $15 impoundment fee. If it's not redeemed within 24 hours, but eventually redeemed, there would be a $35 impoundment fee. Now, these fees are separate from the penalties associated with violating the ordinance. The proceeds from these payments go to offset the expense of care for the animal at the shelter. If council is comfortable with what I've related and ultimately any additional comments that Ms. Michelson can relate or cares to relate, I would recommend that you give us some general guidance in that regard, and we'll place the ordinance on a future agenda and schedule a public hearing.
The only other comments that I would have is that taking into account Councilman Lee's concerns and comments relating to the service dog, I did amend the service dog definition to incorporate some of those thoughts and comments regarding the disability and the use of the dog. So I hope that would address your concerns. And as Mr. Hamp noted, I left it blank now, so we're looking for some guidance on the license fee and penalty. And also with the fees or the penalties in general, we have shifted most of them from criminal to civil, but there are still a few that are criminal. So I wanted to seek council's guidance to see if council has a desire to shift all of them to civil or to leave. It's basically the newly added endangered or what is it? Endangered or
Exotic.
Not the dangerous dog.
no, that's dangerous. The exotic animals, like if you have snakes or something that's outside the norm of a pet that the ACO would consider dangerous to the health, safety, or welfare of the citizens. When we've had some situations that have come up, and luckily the owner of the snakes had voluntarily forfeited the animals, but there was no provision in the city code. So WPT had requested that we have some language in there to account for those incidences that may occur in the future, and those violations would still be considered a criminal, a class 4 misdemeanor, which is not to exceed a $250 penalty, which is set by the court. So the court can set any amount depending on the circumstances or the response of the owner. So I just wanted some guidance on whether council wanted to keep some criminal aspects of the charges or go completely to all civil. And I'd happy to answer any other questions council may have.
Are there any questions?
I think I'd like to see a little more defining of what exotic pets are, a little more definition to it before I made that decision. Because with some animals, there is more responsibility that goes along with them and maybe should be. But I would like to see that a little bit more defined first. Somebody has a Burmese python, that's one thing, but if you've got, an exotic cat, large cat or something like, the folks down in, just down south of us that have the petting zoo, that would imply on them as well if they would have been in our local area, so I don't want to leave it so broad, you know what I'm saying?
We do have this plan to introduce tonight, so would this just be for information and then get back with?
I think it would be, I tried to build in some flexibility to the point where if there was comfort around the information provided about fees and licenses and other provisions in the ordinance, then I would suggest that you move forward with introduction. However, if the council as a body desires some additional presentation and a more detailed explanation, then I would hold off and we'll kind of just repeat this until we get to a point that council's comfortable. I do think that if we can, if we introduce, and the only outstanding sort of need for clarification is around exotic animals, then I'm confident that we can get there.
Well, based on Councilman Wood's comments from the last time, I didn't, instead of defining exotic, I decided to take exotic out of the provision, and I just basically stated that it's unlawful to keep any endangered or threatened animal or poisonous animal that may endanger the health, safety, or welfare of any citizen. So that way it's, it's not just the animal itself, but it will cause some kind of danger to the residents, either if it got out or if it's not being safely kept, or, to your points that you had brought up last time.
Gotcha.
Is council comfortable enough then to move forward
Yeah.
with an introduction? Okay. All right, so is there a motion to introduce the ordinance amending Chapter 14 Animals of the City Code?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood. Do I have a second? Thank you.
I have a
Mr.
point of order question.
Yes.
The license fee and the license penalty is blank, so we'll need, with your motion, a number, two numbers, one for the fee and one for the penalty for
Okay.
license.
All right, so is there a motion to introduce the ordinance amending Chapter 14 Animal City Code with a $7.50 license fee and a $5 late fee?
And yes, I will make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood. And do I have a second, Mr. Allen? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? Okay. This ordinance will be subject to a public hearing and receive final consideration at the October 11th regular business meeting. Item 10 is to receive a report and consider introducing an ordinance amending Chapter 86, backflow prevention of the City Code of Waynesboro. Mr. Chad Rambo, our Assistant Director of Public Works.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Like I said, I'm Chad Rambo, the Assistant Director of Public Works, and tonight I'm going to talk about a request to update our code to backflow prevention. Tonight we're specifically talking about Division 2, cross-connection control and backflow prevention of Article 2 of Chapter 86 of the City Code. And this portion of our code is important because it helps us put measures into place to protect our water supply from contamination. And the reason we're asking for the revision to the code is the Virginia Department of Health revised its waterworks regulation, and so we need to update our code to come in line with that new regulation. I only have 2 slides after this tonight. One is to provide some background, and the other one is to highlight the major revisions in the code. So for background, I thought I'd start with some definitions. These are our definitions for cross-connection and backflow. And generally, when we think about a cross-connection, it's any connection that would allow a harmful substance, liquid, et cetera, to be connected somehow to our water supply. And contamination or pollution occurs when backflow occurs. And backflow generally occurs through 2 means, back siphonage or back pressure. Back siphonage is when we have a loss of pressure on our side and water or liquid of some contaminant is drawn through to our side. Back pressure is when someone on the consumer side is running a pump and they can push water into our side that potentially is contaminated. And a common example, just to give you some context, of where we require backflow prevention in the city are lawn sprinkler systems. So a lawn sprinkler system to work correctly needs to be hooked up to a water supply. So when the lawn sprinkler is on, that sprinkler head comes up above ground level, it waters the yard. But then usually when it's off, that sprinkler head goes down, it's below grade, so there's a depression. And there's the potential for runoff to then run back to that depressed sprinkler head and pool around it, and that runoff could carry pesticides, fertilizer, or other contaminants. And if we were to happen to have a loss of pressure on our side, there's the potential that that water could be siphoned back through the irrigation or the lawn sprinkler system into our water supply. So in this case, we always require backflow prevention. And that's typically a backflow assembly between our water supply and the sprinkler. So if back siphonage does occur, it goes and it hits the backflow assembly and it's contained there, and our water supply is protected. We did update several portions of the code for clarity, but there are really only two major revisions in this requested update. One concerns degrees of hazard, and one concerns tester certification. The degrees of hazard are important because that determines what type of backflow prevention protection you need to put in place. So previously, there were 3 degrees of hazard. There was high, moderate, and low. The moderate category has been eliminated, and now we only have high or low. The primary distinction being that high hazard could lead to a health hazard. When they changed to tester certification requirements, previously, when someone came into the city to test the backflow assemblies, which we require on an annual basis, they had to have the right equipment, they had to know the procedures, but there was no certification. That has since changed. Now a tester must be certified through Virginia in the same manner as a plumber or an electrician. So those are the 2 major updates to the code change we're asking for. And barring any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Okay, is there a motion to introduce the ordinance amending Chapter 86 backflow prevention of the city code? Thank you, Mr. Shorten. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? Okay, this ordinance having been introduced will receive final consideration at the October 11th regular business meeting. Item 11 is to consider adopting a resolution authorizing the city to accept a donation of real property and enter into a donation agreement with EIDP Incorporated. Ms. Michelson.
As council may recall, in 2020, what was then Lycra, which was the successor to DuPont, which is now EIDP Inc., donated several parcels to the city. One of them in what was colloquially referred to as the mountain property off or east of Delphine. And in organizing its land records relating to that transfer, DuPont realized that there was a small portion of the property that was meant to be included in that mountain property. And the mountain property was like 256 acres. And this other parcel was a separate titled and deeded property of 1.423 acres that they meant to include but was left out. So they contacted me and wanted to donate that additional 1.4 acres to the city as well under the same terms that the last donation agreement was included, which is, those of you who were on council at the time may recall that it was basically an as-is, whereas whatever it is what you get, and they're not guaranteeing or warranting any sort of like a quick claim. It's yours, but we're not telling you what it is or what you have. But in our GIS, it's assessed at $113,000, and it's our recommendation that the city accept the donation under the same terms as the last donation. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I guess just for clarification, in our due diligence on the parcel, just for the public's benefit, it was determined that the former use of the site was agricultural in nature.
Yes.
And was an apple orchard,
Yes.
and no contaminants were present.
No. Unlike the other sites, this has had no contamination, no
Right.
anything.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Short. Okay. If there are no questions, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? All in favor of accepting the gift of real property from EIDP Incorporated, say aye. Aye. And none opposed. That motion passes 5-0. Item 12 is to consider introducing an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2024 budget in the amount of $5,069,887. Mr. McCormick?
Thank you, and good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. So this budget amendment has two components. The primary one is the encumbrance roll forward that we do each year. That basically comprises purchase orders that were not fulfilled during the previous year. Think of things like the fiscal year audit that starts in May, ends in November, so we cut the purchase order at the beginning or at the end of one fiscal year, don't complete it until the beginning of the next. That's $4,904.59 of this, and the largest two items in that are $1.5 million for the North Delphine rebuild project, which was the best estimate that we had at the end of the fiscal year, and about $990,000 of microsurfacing and road sealing. The second part of this are just some miscellaneous other grants, donations, and fund balance uses of $165,338. That's comprised of two main things. There's $85,000 using a restricted courthouse reserve, funds about $60,000 of that, and it's for technology upgrades at the Gorsuch Building, and then about $60,000 for a grant match on a new ambulance to help the Waynesboro First Aid Crew pay their portion of a grant match that they received for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. One thing that's a little bit different on this one than the ones that staff usually brings, because of having to coincide the year end and get the books preliminarily closed to get the fund balance number. We were not able to get this advertised in the News Virginian before this meeting, so council, if it wishes, can introduce this evening, and then we'll get the advertisement placed this Friday, and you can consider final consideration and public hearing at your next business meeting. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Only question I have, and we can certainly maybe perhaps circulate it between now and then, is I would be interested to have more specific detail on with the encumbrances and what the appropriations and the specific uses for the appropriations
So
on the general fund side.
I have the list. I can hand it to you.
Okay.
Or
I'll just look at it later. Yeah, it's
okay,
fine.
sure.
Yeah.
I can give it to you when we leave. I have it printed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to introduce the ordinance amending the FY 2024 budget?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? Okay, this ordinance will be subject to a public hearing and receive final consideration at the October 11th regular business meeting. Item 13 is communication, correspondence, and calendar, and comments from our city manager, Mr. Hamp.
Yes, ma'am. I have several items this evening. The first, I wanted to bring to council's attention several important road closures anticipated for this fall and holiday season. The first being closures associated with the Virginia Fall Foliage Art Show, which will occur this year, October 14th and 15th. That's in downtown Waynesboro, of course. Road closures associated with that event are Main Street from Church to Arch and Wayne Avenue from Federal to Lumos. There is some quasi-closure of Lumos Lane in that first block of Main Street. However, access to those stores and establishment is preserved in the rear of those businesses in that block of Main. Secondly, pleased to announce that the city's Christmas parade will occur on Saturday, December 2nd at 6 p.m. That parade will follow the traditional route and involve the following closures. Main Street will be closed from Church to East Avenue. Wayne Avenue will be closed from Lumos to 12th Street. Market Avenue will be closed from north from 12th Street. And Federal will be closed from Church to Arch. Short and Race Avenue will be closed. Short Street and Race Avenue will be closed also, and that's where the parade begins to assemble. Secondly, I want to draw your attention to Walk to School Week, which is approaching. This year it will be celebrated from October 2nd to October 6th. Waynesboro Public Schools has partnered with the Office on Youth, Augusta Health, the City of Waynesboro, Waynesboro Police Department, Waynesboro Fire Department, and the Waynesboro Family YMCA to recognize that event and support that event. Walk to School Week emphasizes the importance of creating safe routes to school, increasing physical activity among children, concern for the environment, and building connections between families, schools, and their community. If you're interested in supporting or volunteering for that event, please let me know and I'll send you some additional information. Finally, I wanted to take some time and provide the council with sort of a status or update report on the question of a rental inspection program in our community. So if you'll give me a few minutes, I'll outline some thoughts that I have as city manager regarding that. This program was raised by representatives of Virginia Organizing, and establishing a rental program itself was not afforded priority by the city manager in the recommended budget for the following reasons. First, tenants can currently file a property maintenance complaint with the Building and Inspection Department. Waynesboro's property maintenance inspectors completed approximately an average of 23 inspections per year for the years 2019 through 2022. In addition, these inspectors perform numerous other property maintenance-related nuisance and inoperative vehicle inspections. Secondly, aside from the programmatic or governmental service remedy, tenants have access to remedy through a judicial solution called the Virginia Landlord Tenants Act. It provides a judicial remedy for maintenance-related and other disputes that are not resolved through service through the Building Inspection Department. Would not recommend at this time undertaking a new program with current staffing levels. The city has one full-time and one part-time employee performing property maintenance inspections. We've looked at similarly sized communities and who operate programs, and for example, the city of Winchester, which is larger than Waynesboro, but has 5 inspectors who perform property maintenance inspections, among others. Even initiating a pilot project would be an enhancement of service levels, and the recommended and ultimately adopted budget for fiscal '24 maintained existing program and service levels, i.e. did not expand or increase them. Fourth reason or justification or important consideration is the fact that the housing market, including rental homes and apartments, is currently tight, with demand significantly outpacing supply, resulting in increasing purchase prices and rents. The introduction of a rental inspection program, while improving quality, will likely result in even higher purchase prices and rents. Some reference has been made to the comprehensive plan, and the plan references a rental inspection program. I think it's important to recognize and note that the comprehensive plan was adopted immediately prior to the COVID pandemic, which did not create a time that was conducive to initiating the program of new and additional in-home inspections. Additionally, I think it's important to note as well that the comprehensive plan also noted or referenced companion programs of financial support, assisting landlords in making improvements. Some residents or constituents were critical of the plan or those aspects of the plan for advancing gentrification. Typically, rental inspections are common in larger municipalities, though not exclusively so. Colonial Heights, a Virginia city with a population of 18,200, has a rental inspection program, as does Hopewell, Virginia, population 23,100. Medium-sized cities larger than Waynesboro with rental inspection programs include Winchester, population 28,000, and Petersburg, population 33,000. Rental inspection districts must be established and and the community may not designate the entire city a rental inspection district. Note that if the city were to elect to enact an inspection program, some effort and discernment would have to be applied to designating which properties and geographies of the city would be subject to the program. I think it's important to note as well that oftentimes we think about and talk about rental inspection programs in terms of apartments, but such a program would apply to rental single-family dwellings as well. I think it's important also to put into context that assurances of quality are limited in that the statute itself prescribes parameters of the number of units that can be inspected. So for example, not more than 10% of units units in complexes with more than 10 units can be inspected through the program, meaning that if you had a rental complex of 50 units, through our program, we would only be able to assess 5 of those 50 units. And so I think it's important to keep in mind perspective of the impact that the program would have. I would say generally also that the benefits of the program ascribe more to the overall quality of housing stock and less to the quality of individual units within the housing stock. It's not to say that the program would not attend to quality of individual units, but generally the cities that I've looked at in our survey adopt these programs more to benefit or to prevent the deterioration of the overall housing stock and less to attend to deficiencies in an individual unit. So in summary, I would note that through our budget process in which we try to, 1, assess satisfaction with service levels and program levels, and 2, identify priority for a coming budget year, neither the city manager or his staff nor the city council identified the program as a budget priority. I would note as well, as I did earlier, that there are existing programmatic and judicial remedy for standard conditions and concerns. I would say admittedly inspection programs do mitigate potentially adversarial relationships between tenants and landlords, at least for those units that are subject to the inspection. And I would say the housing market currently is such that I think any elected body and our staff ought to be careful about enacting programs that would adversely impact price. So that's an update on my thinking about the opportunity and the issue. I would be happy to communicate that information to Virginia Organizing on behalf of the council if that's your desire. I think there's some desire generally, specifically with Virginia Organizing, but also generally in the community for some commentary on the part of either the city manager or the council about where things stand.
Thank you.
I guess I've just got a couple remarks to that. Is one, I would just, for clarification, and again, I know it's when we have our prioritization process in our budget work session, namely the one last year, it was abbreviated, a little confusing. I will say, to broadly brush it, that it was not a council priority is inaccurate. I know it was in my top 3 for addressing housing, so just provide that clarification that I don't think it was representative of all council. Next is the adversarial impact, or the impact on pricing. Is that argument? I mean, I think there's a if we're going to make a statement like that, we need to back it up with real tangible data. Because the reality is that you could say that in any market. You could say that in any market, whether or not, housing prices are stable, rental prices are stable, you can make that argument at any time. It really boils down to, I think, a value statement of whether or not it's acceptable to have housing conditions in a state that is suitable for human occupancy. And one of the thoughts that I think I've mentioned in the past relates to the use of a refresh on occupancy. So for those that kind of what the building process, how it forms and functions, is that someone can decide they want to build a new stick-built structure in the city of Waynesboro, have a licensed contractor come in, build it, and as soon as it's done and the paint's slapped on the outside, no one can move in there until there's a certificate of occupancy. So the building has been duly investigated and an assessment of its integrity and its construction, and we issue then a certificate of occupancy. For housing, for long-standing housing that can last 50, 80 years in the city, that is, goes through this secular sort of, environment where you have different tenants every year, every 2 years, every 20 years, that property is never considered for occupancy permit ever again. Once it got it its first time, we don't ever do it again. So I think, there are some communities, and I've talked to as part of my work on the Human Development and Education Committee for the Virginia Municipal League, is to have a conversation about what can we do in Virginia that could enable the opportunity to reassess structures that house, 4 units or greater, or 12 units or greater, pick a number, where prior to the transaction of a real estate transaction, that property can be re-inspected and recertified for occupancy. And I think that's what it boils down to, because you have some properties in the city that are long overdue for some care and attention. And so the threat of a landlord saying, well, I'm going to raise your rent $300 a month is inconsistent with what the value of that property is in the first place, and the suitability of it for human habitation. So I would say that before we make statements that, because I detect that as a sort of a, I would need to see data that's, in the city of Winchester, obviously they still think it's a great idea, right? Because their council is investing tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars really, into the program every single year. They've done so for as long as I can, relate. And I think I saw the first, Ms. Michelson might know because her law firm represents it, the city, but I think that they've had that inspection program for well over a decade, maybe 15 years. So something's working out right? They must be satisfied with it, and they must not feel that it is undermining the value of property in the city of Winchester, because they see fit to continue to operate and function that way. So I just say, I think I am concerned about spot properties across the city that we allow conditions to deteriorate, which then undermine the neighboring valuations of properties and undermine the valuations of entire neighborhoods. And there are real consequences to that as well. So that's all I had to say about that.
Do we know how many calls Winchester was getting per year when they instituted the program?
It's more than a decade old. I think the entire staff is turned over. And they probably don't keep, our record retention probably wouldn't obligate them to keep that
Can't
data.
imagine it would, but to me, that much money for 23 calls a year, I don't want to see anybody in a hazardous living environment. I grew up in an area where that's very well known, and I don't want to see that. But 23 calls a year, I don't think warrants that kind of money and investment of taxpayer dollars. I don't know. I think, I don't know what the right answer is. I'll be the first one to tell you that, because you're kind of torn. Because you don't want to see people living in squalor. You don't want to see people living in places that are not habitable. But also, to add, every penny we add to the tax rate to provide programs like that can also counterbalance and put other people in a worse position in their life also. So I would, I appreciate your research in it and the information you gave us. I don't know about 23. I was assuming it was more than 23 calls per year also to start with. That's kind of where I'm at.
The 23 calls was Winchester?
No, that's the average per year that we experienced in Waynesboro from 2019 through 2022.
So I have a concern, just based on the comments from Mr. Short about the certificate of occupancy. Is that something that could be looked at further?
I'm not familiar with, I understand what Mr. Short is saying, but I'm not aware that there's authority under the code for us to do that.
There's not in Virginia.
Right.
There's not in Virginia. It would require a General Assembly action. There's some states that have that, to creatively explore. And I think the other thing that we don't know is that the folks that, whatever the circumstances are, that are experiencing trauma, are the least likely the individuals to reach out for help, right? So I don't necessarily take a total of a dozen or 24 phone calls a year as my North Star as to whether or not we have an issue in the city. I ride my bike with my kids all over the city. I drive around to every single neighborhood across the city. I do it every single week, and I can tell you that there are housing conditions in multi-dwelling units that need attention. And I would almost bet you $1 to donuts, nobody from those buildings have ever called. But it undermines the quality of that housing, and the condition of that housing undermines the peripheral values of neighborhoods, which was also articulated in the comprehensive plan.
Well, I think that, if I might.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of what I was trying to get at with the statement that the programs tend to be aimed more at what you might observe from the street than what you might experience behind the front
Right.
door. And so I think that cities that are doing this are looking at their housing stock and saying, we have a real concern about this particular complex or this neighborhood, rather than some of the difficult stories that we heard about individual experiences.
Right, I agree. When I read about this in Winchester, when they first started, and Tim Humans, who's I think since retired, right?
No, he's still there.
Is he still there? Well, Tim's been around, so.
37 years.
Yeah. When I've talked to him, we had lunch years back, and been to Zier about that program, and they focused on very, very specific neighborhoods. They started the program very small and kind of grew, across with it. I'm surprised and not surprised that there are 8 inspectors. I mean, I think that's speaks to it. But they started off small. It was for just like you said. But I also recognize that if council wants to make that a priority, then we need to have that as a conversation, when we have our retreat, and when we contemplate what opportunities might be avail themselves to the community through a budget process. So I certainly respect that.
I would add that having been a landlord for 25-plus years, I never rented any of my rental property without people coming, looking at it, walking through it, checking it, and asking questions about this or that, or does this need to be replaced, or we carpet it before you move in. And I never had a complaint from a tenant that they said, we had a problem, I went and corrected it. And not all landlords do that.
No, right.
And I know that hopefully whoever goes out to rent an apartment or a house, they're going to do their due diligence. They're going to go inspect it, look at it. And I mean, it's kind of like buying a car. I've never bought a car that I didn't test drive. Well, I never myself rented a place that I didn't go and look at. And if I had questions, the guy go, oh, well, I'll fix that, or I'll do this. And well, maybe you get it fixed and I'll come back and look at it. So we have to put some responsibility on the individual who's going to rent. But we do get calls, 23 on an average a year, which is not a lot. And I know that as you ride around through our beautiful city, we see some houses that I'm glad I'm not their neighbor. They don't keep it up, and it reflects on the part of town, the community that you live in. I think that in my time here, I know we've shut down a few apartment buildings because of complaints. And I'll say, we went and inspected some as a council to walk through them. And it was wouldn't want anybody in my family or anybody that I know to be living in those conditions. Unfortunately, there's some people out here that's what they can afford, and they can't go get a better place. And, you know, I don't know if this program would change that, or if there's something we can, you know, work with departments and opportunities that are out here to try to weed out the really bad ones. But, I mean, I have all the confidence in their inspection office when they get a call, or a lot of times I think they'll ride by and see somebody doing some work that hasn't gotten a license, and they've gone in to check it on their own. And, but, you know, the big thing is, you know, do we want, how much staff do we want, and a good discussion we can have, you know, in the budget season. You know, will one person would make a big difference?
Right, right.
And we've got a police force out here that patrols the city 24/7. You ride through this town now and you look at all the abandoned vehicles and disabled vehicles and unlicensed vehicles and violation parking. And, you know, we got all these police out here looking at it, and I don't see where we're doing a really good job of cleaning that up. So I don't know if one person in that department is going to make that big of a splash.
Right, yeah. Fair enough.
I'll add one last thing for me anyway. I applaud what, you know, Virginia Organizing, what their intent is, what they're trying to do. You know, we need citizens who are doing what they're doing. But in talking with them in the past and looking into their organization, their board of directors, there's some pretty impressive resumes on that board of directors. And I would implore on the local grassroots folks in Virginia Organizing to talk to them about going to Richmond and looking at it from a statewide standpoint instead of a local, where budgets are a little bit more, you know, they have a little bit more money to spend than some of the local municipalities have, where our budgets are usually fairly tight. So it's not that nobody around here has a heart and doesn't want to help, but I think they would do a great job from the state down instead of the municipalities up.
You know, one tag on to that, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's the thing that I've been frustrated and learned about over the last, you know, near year or so, is that really we just, and like so many things, I get it. The Dillon rule state, we can't do anything that the General Assembly doesn't endow upon us. But if we had the ability to aggressively target these absentee landlords and building owners on our terms and every community across Virginia's terms, I think we'd be in a better spot. But it is very heavily regulated in Richmond. Speaking of which, unrelated, Madam Mayor, I would also offer that, just as a suggestion, perhaps for the next meeting, or you know, maybe to circulate through email or whatever is convenient for council. But we do have you know, a couple new members that'll be joining the General Assembly on the upcoming session, and with the you know, the governor's full budget and a borrowing year, I think there are some opportunities presenting themselves that I think it would be advisable if we can maybe perhaps put a list together for council's consideration in terms of a legislative action agenda for us to, namely the Virginia Museum of Natural History and the like. We'll have a couple of new members that we already know. I think all the candidates are supportive of, but it'd be wonderful to cement that support from council and our community for those initiatives.
Yes, sir. Good suggestion.
Thank you.
So one last thing, this is a concern for me, and I think that it's something that we probably need to discuss more, maybe at the retreat, to Mr. Short's point, because while I don't particularly like the term "not a priority for council," I just think that of the 23, I would be curious to know, of those 23 per year, how would they resolve? And I know that's probably a big ask, but what it was and how was it resolved would be interesting to me as well. So I think this is something that we need to discuss, and maybe the retreat is the best place to do that before we kind of say no.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kitty.
Okay, we will move on to item 14, which is, wait, what were we on?
Citizen comment.
Citizen comment period.
No one has signed up to speak.
Okay,
Didn't have a chance to sign up. I would like to speak if I may.
I'll allow it.
I'm Sharon Van Name, 2116 Bellevue. My comments have to do about this housing rentals inspection program. I think that Virginia Organizing and many other citizens of this city spent a lot of time and effort, did a lot of research, took up petitions, made several presentations to City Council, and I think that it is inappropriate and disrespectful for the response from the city manager to be buried under calendaring and others, things that are usually of no import. It was not on the agenda. There was no opportunity for Virginia Organizing or anyone else to know that this was going to be discussed tonight. And I think that's wrong and very disrespectful to the people who put so much time and effort into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Item 15 is to hold a closed session to discuss the acquisition of real property to be used in municipal offices as authorized by Section 2.23711. Is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move this meeting be recessed and that the City Council of Waynesboro immediately reconvene in a closed meeting per Code of Virginia 2.2-3711. 3, to discuss or consider the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or of the disposition of publicly held real property where the discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of a public body, specifically acquisition of real property for city offices.
Okay, and do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Ms. Bortle?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood.
Aye.
Councilman Allen. Councilman Short.
Aye.
Councilman Lee.
Okay, we're in closed session. Council to return to open session and certify.
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the City Council of Waynesboro has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this City Council that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of Waynesboro hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and two, only such business matters were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the City Council of Waynesboro.
Okay, do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Any discussion? Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Ms. Bordeaux?
Mayor Williams,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood,
Aye.
Councilman Allen, Councilman Short,
Aye.
Councilman Lee.
Aye.
We're back in session, and that brings us to item 16. This concludes the business of our agenda this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I knew you would. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.